The message arrived at 3 in the morning station time, and Ambassador Cole knew from the first words that everything was about to change. She stood in her private quarters on Prime, the neutral station where humanity maintained its diplomatic presence, and she listened to the emergency transmission with growing horror. The Dominion had attacked New Bristol. The human colony was burning. Dressed quickly and rushed to the communications center. More reports were coming in now, each one worse than the last. New Bristol had been a peaceful settlement of 40,000 people. Farmers, teachers, scientists, families who wanted to build a new life on a distant world. The colony had a small security force, but nothing that could stand against a military assault. They had never expected one. Humanity had been at peace with every species in the galaxy for 60 years. The attack had come without warning. Warships dropped out of faster-than-light traveled directly above the colony and began their assault before anyone could send a distress signal. The reptilian soldiers landed in waves, their weapons cutting down anyone who tried to resist. The fighting lasted 6 hours. When it was over, every adult who had raised a weapon was dead. But they had not come simply to destroy. They had come to take. New Bristol had a large educational complex. Nearly 8,000 children lived and studied there, ranging from the very young to teenagers preparing for university. They loaded them onto transport ships while the colony burned. By the time human relief vessels arrived, there was nothing left but ruins and bodies and the terrible silence of a place where life had once flourished. Received the final casualty report and had to steady herself against the wall. 12,000 dead, 8,000 children missing, taken to space to be sold as slaves. The Dominion had broadcast a message across all frequencies, mocking humanity for its weakness. The peaceful ones they called humans, too soft to protect their own young. The Dominion would take whatever it wanted, and humanity could do nothing to stop them. She requested an emergency session of the Galactic Compact Council. As a member species, humanity had the right to call upon its allies for support. Surely the galaxy would not stand idle while children were dragged into slavery. Surely the other species would see this attack for what it was and respond with unified outrage. The council chamber was vast and circular, with representatives from 37 species arranged in tiered seating. Stood at the central podium and presented her case. She showed them images of New Bristol before and after. She read the names of the dead. She described the children who had been taken, their ages, their faces, their dreams that had been stolen. She asked for the compact to invoke its mutual defense provisions and join humanity in recovering the captives and punishing The delegate spoke first. His species was ancient and considered itself wise in the ways of galactic politics. He expressed sympathy for humanity's loss but counseled patience. The Dominion was powerful and conflict would be costly. Perhaps a ransom could be negotiated. Perhaps in time the children could be purchased back through proper channels. War was not the answer. The representative agreed. Her people had dealings with thee and preferred to maintain those relationships. She suggested that humanity should have invested more in defensive capabilities. The attack was tragic, but perhaps it would teach the young species valuable lessons about the dangers of the galaxy. One by one, the other delegates offered similar responses. Sympathy without action, advice without commitment, excuses dressed up as wisdom. Not a single species volunteered military support. Not one offered to stand beside humanity against the Dominion. The treaties and alliances that humanity had honored for 6 decades meant nothing when tested. Listened to it all with a calm expression that hid the fury building inside her. When the last delegate finished speaking, she thanked the council for their time and their counsel. She said she would relay their positions to her government. Then she walked out of the chamber and returned to the human embassy to await instructions from Earth. The response came within hours. Secretary General Brooks appeared on the secure communication screen, his face grave and his eyes holding something had never seen before. He informed her that humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Compact effective immediately. All treaties were dissolved. All diplomatic agreements were void, asked what would come next, and was silent for a long moment before answering. He told her that humanity had tried peace. They had offered friendship to every species they encountered. They had kept their word, honored their obligations, and believed in the promise of galactic cooperation. That belief had cost them 12,000 lives and 8,000 children. Now humanity would speak in the only language the galaxy seemed to understand. Asked him directly what he meant, told her to watch the news feeds. In 24 hours, the galaxy would have its answer. Across human space, the message went out to every ship, every colony, every station, and every citizen. It was broadcast on all frequencies in all languages so that no one could claim ignorance. Secretary General Brooks appeared on screens throughout known space and delivered a simple statement. The Dominion had committed an act of war against humanity. They had murdered civilians and enslaved children. The Galactic Compact had refused to act. Therefore, humanity would act alone. For the first time in its interstellar history, the human species declared total war. The announcement was met with confusion and amusement by most of the galaxy. Humanity had perhaps 200 combat-capable ships. The Dominion had 3,000. The peaceful ones were going to fight the warriors, and everyone knew how that story would end. Betting pools formed on various stations, wagering on how many days humanity would last before surrendering. Some gave them a week. Others were more generous and allowed a month. In the human embassy on Prime, Cole watched the reactions of the galaxy with cold satisfaction. They did not understand. They could not understand. For 60 years, humanity had smiled and cooperated and kept its secrets. Now those secrets would be revealed and the galaxy would learn what humans truly were. They were not the peaceful ones. They were simply patient, and their patience had finally run out. The children of New Bristol would come home. They would pay for every drop of blood they had spilled, and the galaxy would discover what true war looked like when waged by a species that had perfected the art of violence long before it ever reached the stars. Humanity had spoken. Now the reckoning would begin. 3 weeks passed after humanity declared war, and the galaxy watched with growing amusement as nothing seemed to happen. Human trade ships stopped traveling. Human diplomats went silent. Human colonies closed their borders and turned away visitors. It was as if the entire species had retreated into itself, hiding from the consequences of its foolish announcement. The Dominion took this as confirmation of what they already believed. Humans were cowards who had spoken brave words, but lacked the courage to follow through. Warlord, the commander who had led the assault on New Bristol, became something of a celebrity throughout Dominion space. He gave interviews on news broadcasts, boasting about the ease of his victory. He displayed images of the captured children, promising that they would fetch excellent prices at the slave markets. When asked about the human declaration of war, he laughed and said he was still waiting for humanity to show up. Perhaps they had gotten lost on the way to battle. The other species of the galaxy shared his amusement. Intelligence analysts from a dozen civilizations studied humanity's known military capabilities and reached the same conclusion. The humans had roughly 200 ships capable of combat operations. Most were small patrol vessels designed for police actions against pirates. Their largest warships were defensive platforms meant to protect space stations and orbital facilities. Against the 3,000 vessels of the war fleet, humanity would be destroyed in days. But the analysts were working with incomplete information. They knew only what humanity had chosen to reveal over 60 years of peaceful contact. They did not know what humanity had kept hidden. On Luna, Earth's largest moon, Admiral stood in the command center of a facility that officially did not exist. Around her, thousands of personnel worked at stations monitoring the largest military mobilization in human history. Shipyards that had been building exploration vessels and cargo haulers were now producing warships at a rate that would have shocked the galaxy. But the ships were only part of the secret. Humanity had spent 60 years watching and learning. They studied every species they encountered, cataloging their technologies, their tactics, their strengths and weaknesses. Human scientists reverse-engineered alien systems and then improved upon them. Human strategists analyzed every conflict in galactic history and developed countermeasures for every known weapon and defense. They did this quietly, patiently, always maintaining the appearance of the friendly newcomers who posed no threat to anyone. The quantum fold drive was humanity's greatest secret. Every other species used faster-than-light systems that left detectable signatures and required specific entry and exit points. Human ships could appear anywhere at any time without warning. They had possessed this capability for 40 years and never revealed it. The galaxy believed human vessels were slow and limited in range. The galaxy was wrong. Admiral reviewed the fleet status reports with satisfaction. The 200 ships that the galaxy knew about were still in their usual positions, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. But behind them, hidden in classified shipyards throughout human space, waited over 2,000 warships equipped with technologies the galaxy had never seen. Weapons that could cut through the strongest known shields. Defensive systems that could absorb punishment that would destroy any other vessel. Electronic warfare suites that could blind enemy sensors and communications. Commander Daniel Perry stood on the bridge of the Resolute, one of the new heavy cruisers that would lead the first assault wave. His crew had trained for this moment for years, running simulations against every possible enemy configuration. Lieutenant Sandra Hayes managed the weapon systems, her fingers moving across controls with practiced precision. Chief Engineer Bell monitored the power systems that would feed their devastating armaments. Pilot Specialist Amy Grant held the ship steady as they waited for the order to move. Daniel had served in the human fleet for 15 years. He had always known this day might come, though he had hoped it would not. Humanity had genuinely wanted peace. They had genuinely believed that cooperation and goodwill could build a better galaxy, but they had never been naive enough to trust that belief completely. They had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Now the worst had arrived and they were ready. Intelligence reports came in from human operatives who had infiltrated space within days of the attack on New Bristol. The children were being held on a fortress world called Prime, deep in Dominion territory. They were alive, but being processed for distribution to slave markets throughout space. Time was running out. Once the children were scattered across dozens of worlds, recovering them would become nearly impossible. Admiral called a final briefing for all fleet commanders. She appeared on screens throughout the hidden armada, her expression calm and determined. She laid out the battle plan in clear terms. The objective was not merely to rescue the children, though that was the priority. The objective was to systematically destroy the Dominion's ability to wage war. Every military installation would be eliminated. Every warship would be disabled or destroyed. Every slave market would be shut down permanently. The Dominion had chosen to prey upon the weak, and now they would face the consequences. The commanders acknowledged their orders. Ships began powering up systems that had waited decades for activation. Crews ran final checks on weapons they had trained with but never fired in actual combat. Across the hidden fleet, men and women prepared themselves for what was coming. Some prayed. Some wrote messages to loved ones. Some simply sat in silence, gathering their courage for the battle ahead. Daniel looked at his crew and felt a surge of pride. Sandra had a personal stake in this mission that she had kept private, but he had learned the truth. Her younger brother Christopher was among the children taken from New Bristol. She had volunteered for this assignment knowing the risks, driven by something deeper than duty, and Amy and every other crew member had their own reasons for being here. Some had lost family at New Bristol. Others simply could not stand by while children suffered. Admiral gave the final order. The quantum fold drives engaged, and over 2,000 human warships vanished from their hidden positions. They would reappear at the border in precisely coordinated waves, striking before the enemy could react. The peaceful ones were coming, and they were bringing 60 years of suppressed fury with them. In his command center on Prime, Warlord received reports of unusual energy readings along the border. His subordinates dismissed them as sensor glitches. There was nothing to worry about. The humans were hiding in their territory, too frightened to fight. The galaxy knew this to be true. Everyone knew this to be true. Everyone was wrong. The border system of had never been attacked in the 300 years since the Dominion claimed it. 400 warships patrolled the space around the massive military station that served as the forward command post for all Dominion operations in this sector. The crews went about their duties with the casual confidence of warriors who had never tasted defeat. They monitored their sensors and maintained their weapons, and waited for orders that usually involved raiding some helpless colony or escorting slave transports. It was routine work, and they had grown complacent in their certainty of superiority. The first sign of trouble was a strange ripple in space itself, as if reality was folding in upon itself. The sensor operators had never seen anything like it. Before they could report the anomaly, human ships began appearing throughout the system in perfect formation. One moment there was empty space. The next moment there were hundreds of warships where no warships should be. The commanders reacted with trained efficiency despite their shock. They called for battle stations and began organizing their fleet into defensive positions. Their weapons powered up and their shields activated. They outnumbered the attacking force and held the defensive advantage. The humans would learn the price of their foolishness. Then the human ships opened fire, and everything they believed about warfare changed forever. The Resolute led a strike group of 12 cruisers directly at the heart of the formation. Commander Daniel Perry watched the tactical display as Sandra coordinated their weapons systems. The first salvo of human missiles screamed across the void toward the enemy vessels. Point defense systems attempted to intercept them, but the missiles were too fast and too numerous. They struck the lead battleship and punched through its shields as if they did not exist. The vessel broke apart in a cascade of explosion that consumed everything aboard. Across the system, the same scene repeated itself hundreds of times. Human weapons tore through defenses with terrifying ease. The shields that had protected Dominion ships for centuries might as well have been paper against the technologies humanity had developed in secret. Vessels attempted to return fire, but their targeting systems could not lock onto the human ships. Electronic warfare systems scrambled their sensors and communications, leaving them blind and confused. Daniel ordered the Resolute forward into the chaos of battle. Amy guided them through a maze of debris and weapons fire with skill that seemed almost supernatural, kept the power systems running at maximum capacity, feeding energy to shields and weapons in perfect balance. Sandra fired again and again, each shot finding its target with deadly precision. They moved through the formation like a blade through flesh, leaving destruction in their wake. The commanders tried to rally their forces. They called for reinforcements from other systems. They attempted to coordinate a counterattack against the human fleet, but their communications were jammed, their sensors were blind, and their weapons could not find targets. They were warriors who had built their entire civilization on military strength, and they were being slaughtered by a species they had dismissed as weaklings. The battle lasted 90 minutes. When it was over, 312 warships had been destroyed or disabled. The massive orbital command station was a burning ruin. The survivors fled into faster-than-light travel, carrying tales of horror to the rest of the Dominion. Humanity had lost 4 ships against over 300 enemy vessels. The mathematics of the battle would haunt strategists for generations. Across the galaxy, other species watched the battle footage with growing disbelief. The Compact Council convened an emergency session to discuss what they had witnessed. This was not the humanity they knew. These were not the peaceful ones who smiled and cooperated and avoided conflict. These were predators who had been pretending to be prey, and now their true nature was revealed. Secretary General Brooks appeared on every news channel in known space. His expression was grave, but his voice was steady. He addressed the galaxy directly, knowing that billions of beings from dozens of species were watching. He told them that humanity had given the compact 60 years of peace and cooperation and good faith. They had honored every treaty. They had kept every promise. They had offered friendship to every species they encountered. In return, the Dominion had murdered their civilians and stolen their children. The Galactic Compact had counseled patience and suggested ransom payments. Paused and let his words sink in before continuing. He stated that the Dominion would return every child unharmed within 30 standard days. If they refused, humanity would reduce their civilization to ash. This was not a threat. This was not a negotiation. This was a simple statement of fact. The children would come home, or the Dominion would burn. Warlord received the broadcast on Prime and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. His intelligence officers brought him updated assessments of human military strength, and the numbers made no sense. Where had these ships come from? Where had these weapons been developed? How had humanity hidden this capability for 60 years without anyone suspecting? He called for allies among the other species of the galaxy. Surely someone would stand against human aggression. Surely the Compact would not allow one species to wage war without consequence. But the responses he received were disappointing. They expressed concern but offered no support. The suddenly discovered pressing domestic issues that required their full attention. Other species simply did not respond at all. They had seen the battle footage. They remembered which species had attacked first and stolen children. They wanted no part of this conflict. On the Resolute, Sandra stood at her station and studied the tactical map showing the path to Prime. Her brother was on that world, held in some prison or slave processing facility. She had kept her personal connection to the mission private because she did not want special treatment. She was a professional, and she would do her duty regardless of her feelings. Daniel walked up beside her and spoke quietly so only she could hear. He told her that he knew about her brother. He had read her file and understood why she had volunteered for this assignment. He promised her that they would bring Christopher home. They would bring all the children home. The Dominion had made a terrible mistake when they took those children, and now they would pay for it. The human fleet did not pause to celebrate their victory. System by system, they advanced deeper into Dominion territory. Each battle was broadcast across the galaxy. Each victory demonstrated that humanity's restraint had never been weakness. It had been a choice, and that choice had ended. Prime was the most heavily defended world in the Dominion. The fortress planet sat at the heart of their territory, protected by 1,500 warships, dozens of orbital defense platforms, and ground-based weapons capable of destroying anything that approached from space. Warlord had gathered every available vessel to defend this world, knowing that the humans would eventually come for their children. He had prepared a final line of defense that he believed would stop even the terrible human fleet. He had also prepared a darker strategy. If the humans attacked, he would order the children killed. Let the enemy watch their precious young die before their eyes. Let them understand that they would never surrender, never submit, never allow their enemies a complete victory. The threat had been broadcast to the human fleet as they approached. Come any closer and the children die. Admiral received the threat and felt cold fury settle into her heart. She had known they might try something like this. That was why the assault on Prime would not begin with the fleet. It would begin with something the Dominion could not defend against. Major led a team of 60 special operations soldiers who had trained for this mission for months. They wore suits equipped with personal quantum fold devices, miniaturized versions of the drives that powered human warships. These devices could transport a single person across vast distances, appearing anywhere without warning. The technology was so secret that even most of the human military did not know it existed. And his team folded directly onto the surface of Prime, bypassing the orbital defenses entirely. They materialized in predetermined locations throughout the slave processing complex where the children were held. The guards had no time to react. One moment the corridors were empty. The next moment, human soldiers were moving through them with lethal efficiency. The Special Operations Team had studied the facility layouts obtained by human intelligence operatives. They knew where every guard station was located. They knew the patrol schedules and the security codes and the locations of the children within the complex. They moved in perfect coordination, neutralizing threats before alarms could be raised. Found the first group of children huddled in a large holding cell. They were human boys and girls ranging from 5 to 15 years old, thin and frightened and dressed in the simple garments of slaves. When they saw the human soldiers in their distinctive black armor, some of them began to cry, knelt down and spoke softly to them. He told them that they were safe now. He told them that humanity had come to bring them home. Throughout the complex, similar scenes unfolded. Room by room, cell by cell, the children were located and secured. Medical personnel who had folded in with the assault teams began treating the most urgent cases. The children had been poorly fed and roughly handled, but they were alive. All 8,000 of them were alive. Above the planet, the human fleet engaged the Armada. Commander Daniel Perry led the Resolute into the heart of the battle, drawing enemy fire away from the planet, while the rescue operation continued below. Sandra worked her weapons console with fierce determination, knowing that her brother was somewhere on that world. Every ship she destroyed was one less threat to the children. Battle was the largest of the war. 1,500 vessels against 1,200 human ships. The Dominion had the numbers advantage for the first time, and their crews fought with the desperation of those defending their homeland. But desperation could not overcome technological superiority. Human weapons continued to cut through shields. Human electronic warfare systems continued to blind enemy sensors. The Dominion fleet was dying, ship by ship, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Warlord watched the battle from his command center and knew that defeat was approaching. He reached for the communications panel to give the order that would kill the children. If he could not have victory, he would at least have revenge. But when he transmitted the command, there was no response. His guards at the slave complex were not answering. His security systems showed no activity. The humans had somehow reached the surface without his knowledge, and the children were beyond his reach. Felt true despair for the first time in his life. He had built his reputation on strength and cruelty, on the power to take what he wanted and destroy anyone who opposed him. Now that power meant nothing. The peaceful ones had come for their children, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them. Secured the last section of the facility and reported to Admiral that all children were accounted for. Shuttles began descending through gaps in the orbital battle, protected by human fighter escorts. The evacuation would take hours, but the ground was secure. The children were safe. Sandra watched the sensor display as one particular shuttle lifted off from the surface. Her brother was on that shuttle. She had received confirmation from the ground team that Christopher Hayes had been found alive and was being evacuated. She allowed herself one moment of overwhelming relief before returning her attention to the battle. There would be time for tears later. Right now, there was still work to do. The shuttle carrying Christopher docked with the Resolute 2 hours later. Sandra met it in the hangar bay, her heart pounding as the doors opened. The children emerged in small groups, guided by medical personnel and counselors who would help them begin the long process of recovery. And then she saw him, a thin boy with dark hair and tired eyes who looked older than his 12 years. Christopher saw her at the same moment, and his face transformed with recognition and joy. Sandra dropped to her knees as her brother ran into her arms. She held him tight and whispered that it was over. The monsters would never hurt him again. Christopher clung to her and asked if they were really going home. Sandra told him yes. They were going home. All of them were going home. Admiral gave the order to complete the destruction of Prime's military capabilities. Orbital platforms were reduced to debris. Ground installations were bombarded into craters. The fleet was shattered beyond any possibility of recovery. When it was over, the fortress world that had symbolized Dominion power for centuries was defenseless. The children of New Bristol were finally safe, but humanity's message to the galaxy was not yet complete. They had to understand, and every other species had to understand, that some lines must never be crossed. The war would continue until that lesson was learned. 6 months had passed since the rescue of the children from Prime, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality that humanity had created. The Dominion no longer existed as a unified military power. Their fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in remote systems. Their slave markets had been shut down permanently. Their warlords were either dead, captured, or in hiding. An empire that had terrorized dozens of species for centuries had been dismantled in less than half a year. The Galactic Compact sent formal requests for humanity to rejoin their alliance. Secretary-General Brooks declined each invitation with polite but firm language. He explained that the compact had failed its most basic purpose when it refused to protect innocent children. Humanity would not place its trust in organizations that valued political convenience over moral duty. Instead, humanity would forge its own path and build alliances with species who shared its values. The war crimes trials began on Earth, broadcast throughout the galaxy so that all species could witness human justice. Warlord was among the defendants, brought before a tribunal to answer for the attack on New Bristol and the enslavement of thousands of children. He had expected savage retribution from his captors. Humans were supposed to be violent and vengeful, driven by emotion rather than reason. That was what he had been told about throughout his life. Instead, he received something he did not understand: a fair trial with proper legal procedures, evidence presented methodically and evaluated impartially, judges who listened to all arguments before rendering judgment, defense attorneys who worked to ensure that even the accused received proper representation. Watched this process unfold with growing confusion. Where was the brutality? Where was the revenge? The verdict was guilty on all charges. The sentence was life imprisonment without possibility of release. Would spend his remaining years in a human detention facility, treated humanely but never allowed to harm anyone again. He would be forced to watch as the galaxy he had terrorized rebuilt itself free from oppression. Some who observed the trial thought the sentence was too lenient. Others understood that forcing to witness the undoing of everything he had built was a punishment far worse than death. New alliances formed in the aftermath of the war. They were among the first to approach humanity with offers of partnership. Their species had long opposed aggression but lacked the military strength to act on their convictions. Now they saw in humanity a potential ally that shared their commitment to protecting the innocent. Trade agreements and mutual defense pacts were negotiated within weeks. Other species followed. Dissidents who had been ashamed of their government's cowardice broke away to form independent communities that aligned themselves with human values. Smaller civilizations that had lived in fear of the Dominion for generations now looked to humanity for protection. A new coalition began to take shape, built not on political convenience but on shared principles. Commander Daniel Perry received his promotion to admiral in a ceremony on Luna. He stood before the assembled officers and accepted the rank with humility, knowing that the honor belonged equally to every person who had served under his command. Sandra Hayes stood among the crowd, watching with pride as her former commanding officer took on new responsibilities. She had returned to active duty after a brief leave to help her brother readjust to life on Earth. Christopher was receiving treatment and counseling, surrounded by family who would help him heal from his ordeal. Bell remained chief engineer on the Resolute, now under a new captain who valued his expertise. Amy Grant had been offered positions on a dozen different ships, but chose to stay where she was. The crew had become a family during the war, bound together by shared experiences that civilians could never fully understand. They patrolled the trade routes that had once been plagued by raiders, ensuring that merchant vessels and passenger ships could travel safely. Major established a training program for new special operations units, preparing them for missions that he hoped would never be necessary. The techniques his team had developed during the rescue of the children were now standard curriculum. Human soldiers learned to strike swiftly and precisely, to neutralize threats without unnecessary destruction, to protect the innocent while eliminating those who would harm them. On the rebuilt colony of New Bristol, a memorial was dedicated on the first anniversary of the attack. Every name was carved into walls of white stone. The names of those who had died defending their homes, the names of the children who had been taken and returned, the names of the soldiers who had given their lives bringing them back. Secretary General Brooks attended the ceremony and delivered a speech that was broadcast across human space and beyond. He spoke of humanity's hope for peace. That hope had not died with the attack on New Bristol. Humanity still believed that cooperation and goodwill could build a better galaxy. They still reached out hands of friendship to any species willing to take them. But they would never again trust the safety of their children to the promises of others. They would never again mistake restraint for weakness or patience for fear. When threatened, humanity would respond with whatever force was necessary to protect its own. Ambassador Cole returned to Prime, but her role had changed. She no longer represented humanity to the Galactic Compact. Instead, she served as the point of contact for species seeking genuine partnership with humanity. Delegations arrived daily, some curious, some eager, some desperate for protection from threats they could not face alone. A young diplomat asked her a question that had haunted the galaxy since the war began. Why had humanity hidden its true strength for 60 years? Why had they pretended to be weak when they were so powerful? Considered the question carefully before answering. She explained that strength used carelessly becomes tyranny. Power without restraint corrupts those who wield it. Humanity had watched the galaxy and seen empires rise and fall, civilizations destroy themselves through arrogance and aggression. They had chosen a different path. They offered friendship first. They sought peaceful solutions whenever possible. They believed that the measure of a species was not how much destruction it could cause, but how much suffering it could prevent. But when the choice was taken from them, when their children were stolen and their people murdered, they made certain the galaxy would never forget the cost of threatening what they held dear. Not through cruelty or conquest, but through decisive action that ended the threat permanently. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. They had learned the truth too late. The young diplomat nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He asked if humanity still hoped for peace despite everything that had happened, smiled and told him yes. They always hoped for peace. They always would. But now they carried the strength to build the peace they hoped for, rather than simply hoping that others would provide it. Among the stars, human ships patrolled trade routes and protected vulnerable worlds. Former slave planets rebuilt under the watchful eyes of those who would never allow such suffering again. The galaxy had discovered what true war looked like when waged by humanity, and it had also discovered what true peace could look like when humanity was there to defend it. The children of New Bristol were home. The monsters who had taken them were gone, and humanity stood ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, their patience intact but their resolve never again to be questioned. They had spoken, and the galaxy had listened. Now they would build a better universe together with those who shared their dreams.